This is Sports 225.
Well, if you go to the dictionary and you look up media ubiquitous, you see my friend Matt Moscona, and he is, in fact, there he is. How you doing?
I'm doing awesome. Thanks for having me, Lee. It's a pleasure.
We give each other more grief, but it's all in fun. But it's always on Tuesdays at 4:15 when I go on Matt's radio show on 104.5 ESPN, the ever-expanding radio show, which feeds into the previous ubiquitous. But usually about 10 minutes of sports or some semblance thereof, because Matt knows I know less and less about sports as we go. And then about beer, which has become this monster. But yeah, well, you had this, you tweeted something earlier this week about expanding yet again, the radio show.
Yeah, so we very fortunate to do a deal with Delta Media based out of Lafayette, and a great locally owned company that have two radio station sticks, as we call them in the business, that are flipping the ESPN formats at the end of June. So June 26th, ESPN 1037 in Lafayette and ESPN 1041 in Lake Charles will carry AFR. So if you're on the I-10 corridor, NOLA, Baton Rouge, Lafayette, Lake Charles, or Alexandria, you can hear us on terrestrial radio.
Those not in the know, AFR stands for After Further Review, which is Matt's show. And he is the hardest working man in show business. He really, really takes his craft seriously. We don't agree on everything, but, surprisingly, I agree with you on most of your sporting opinions. And I'm kind of surprised by that sometimes.
Well, if we don't agree on everything, Lee, it's because you just don't like being right all the time. So if you're okay being wrong, then you can disagree with me on certain things in your world of uninformed nonsense. How about that? Take that.
Oh, and this coming from a guy who has watched like 3 movies in his life, hates movie references, and
I'm sorry, I don't hate movie references. I've watched more than 3 movies, but I'm not going to take time to watch Blazing Saddles, a movie that's 50 years old. I have no desire to do it. I'm not going to. So if you want to hold that over my head, you can feel free to do it. But I also do a sports talk show, Lee, not a movie review show. So you want to talk sports? Let's talk sports.
And, that's becoming more and more difficult for me. I told this story on that show the other day. So I didn't tell the whole story, right? So listen to this. So it was during the hot art cool nights, or cool art hot nights, whatever it was last week. And it was a very cool event down Government, where there were vendors everywhere and all the restaurants and bars were open and things were happening. It was just fabulous. It was a beautiful night. It was great to see all the people out from Baton Rouge. So we went over to Curbside, which is a hamburger restaurant next to Calandro's, and there's a venue in the back for a band, and friends of ours were playing. So I'm standing there, and guy comes up to me and says, Matt, this is a little embellishment from what I actually told you on the radio show. Okay. He goes, hey, what's the beer of the week? And I said, and he goes, what are you drinking? I'll get you one. I go, well, I'm not. And, I have my hands were empty. I said, I've already had one. I'm driving in a little while. So he says, this is the part. He starts talking about me on your show. And I said, it's something he asked me, sports specific. And I said, I really don't follow sports as close. He goes, yeah, I know. It's pretty obvious. So,
what I do though? I try to lean into what you do know. Like, I really try to lean into a lot of your experience, and the guy who has done a lot over time and has good perspective on things, not just an historical perspective, but if it's conference realignment topics, or I don't know, sometimes you always have interesting stories about 30 years ago, like
well, this past week we talked about the NBA draft, and I went back and looked up. I was really surprised to find out since like 1997 there's only like 6 or 7 overall #1 draft picks who have even won the NBA championship. I was surprised, but anyway, I digress from that part of the story. So he says to me, he said, well, you used to swim with us when I was at Baton Rouge High. And I go, oh yeah. So like in 85, 86, 87, Baton Rouge High swim team would come to the YMCA. They had PE built in for the competitive swim team. So they would swim, like, say, from 9 to 11. And that was their swim practice during the day. Some teams have their right after school. Well, the coach was a friend of mine, and so she would let me get in, and I would actually train with the high school team. And I was good enough then where I could do that, and keep up. I was one of their better sport performers. Heck, I could have scored points in the state meet, and here's this guy now in his obviously well into his 50s, introduced me to his adult children. And I'm like, oh gosh. And I just thought every time I have one of those beer references, I think of you and you get a laugh out of those stories.
Well, you would have been in your mid-late 20s at that point. Like, you should have been physically fit enough to be able to keep up. You should have been in your physical prime. You should be able to keep up with high school kids at that point. Now, probably not.
In my young 30s, yes. Now, I want you have this image of manatee. That's the way I swim. I time myself by a sundial, but I still get after it and do it all the time. Anyway, he is Matt Moscona. He has not only his radio show Monday through Friday, 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. on 104.5 ESPN and in all of the aforementioned I-10 corridor markets that he mentioned, but also, before we go to this first break, because I don't want to go back and just blow smoke up your butt the whole show, but you do an awesome Facebook Live mostly every morning. You roll out of bed and do that. Tell people about that.
Well, that's not mostly. That is every morning. I've done a show called Morning Scone. It's a live stream show that I do on Facebook and YouTube. But today was episode 1929. So that's consecutive days without ever missing. It's
really, I mean, you've not missed even like a Sunday or when you've been on some of your vacations?
I do it on vacation. I've done it from the car. I've done it from airports. I've done it from the best was when I did it from pre-op when I had knee surgery. Hotels. I've hungover. Yeah, I have never. It's been 5 years now. I haven't missed a show in 5 years.
That is absolutely fantastic.
Like, and you can't blow the streak now. Like once you're like, I'm so pod committed, like it's almost like Cal Ripken. I mean, I'm not saying it's the same thing. You know what I mean? It's like, well, when do you take it out? If you don't, you're this committed, like you're this far down the road, just keep going.
This is the last show of the 2022-23 season before we go into the best of for the summer. And I'm feeling a lot like Wally Pipp. All right. He's Matt Moscona. I'm Lee Feinswag. This is Sports 225.
Congratulations, East Baton Rouge. You did it. You topped every big city in the country. You envisioned an ambitious reinvention of our park system. And we, as a community, embarked on a multi-year effort to reimagine our parks and facilities. And all that work didn't go unnoticed. You imagined, we delivered. Gold. BRAC, your #1 park system in the nation.
Back on Sports 225, hanging out with Matt Moscona. This is, I've decided, the last show of the 2022-23 season. So this puts us close to 400 of Sports 225s. There were well over 600 Sports Mondays, but nothing like the aforementioned Scone podcast that we talked about in the previous segment.
Morning Scone.
There you go.
Scone. Search it on YouTube, you'll find.
You have over what would be your left shoulder. I always get confused on these Zoom things. I can't remember which is which. Yeah, a picture of then Chris Jackson, now Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, taking a jump shot. That's a cool cutout. And he was so much fun to watch.
That is from our mutual friend, Matt DeVille, owns an awesome company where he will essentially plan large scale events and do. Anyway, I think it was maybe the 100-year of LSU basketball or one of their season-ending banquets, and they had a line of cutouts of the great players as you entered, and obviously they were taking them down and they were going to be pitched. I was like, I'll take that. So I took CJ and put him there or Mahmoud and put him there on the wall.
Did you see the documentary about him?
I have not yet. I am very anxious to see it, but I have not.
It's really good. Another one, just as an aside, the SEC did a series called Southern Hoops.
I did see that.
Yeah, I really, really enjoyed that. I talked about it a little bit with Ron Higgins because he was in it. They didn't ask me. It's the one thing I know about. But
they probably didn't know. But I did talk to the director when they were launching, because ESPN's done a good job with that, Lee. Like, they've done a really good job with a lot of their 30 for 30s, a lot of the SEC storied series, which is the SEC basketball. And that only got done, Lee, because a year ago they did something similar on SEC football, Southern Traditions or something like that is what they called it. And it was basically the history of SEC football. And it was such a resounding success. They did the same with basketball. And despite the fact that the SEC maybe doesn't have quite the reputation that the ACC or some Big Ten schools might. The SEC's basketball history is pretty long and storied, and certainly the players that have come through the conference.
A lot of good players.
Yeah.
But back to Chris / Mahmoud. Is he your favorite LSU basketball player?
So I was young when he was there. We moved to Baton Rouge in 1989, in summer of 1989. I was 7 years old. And so my first ever, my first year in Baton Rouge, LSU football face planted under Mike Archer. And then in basketball had Chris, Shaq, and Stanley. I mean, that was the only year all three were on the same team, was the 89-90 season. That was my first year at Baton Rouge. So we had basketball season tickets, not football season tickets.
Nice.
That year. So I loved, obviously, going to the games then as a kid. If you ask me my favorite LSU basketball player of all time, I love to watch the highlights of Mahmoud, and I can't say that I have many stirring memories watching specific games. So it's really hard for me to pinpoint, because throughout my college years, and then being out of college, watching the Final Four team in 2006, and then recent history, it's really been hit or miss with this program. You haven't had the guy that really has stuck around and been an all-time player in that era. So it's tough. I feel like I missed a lot of the really great players that people talk about.
Yeah, like in my case, I was a beat writer for quite a while, and there were those few great years with all those players, including my favorite player, which I'll get to for a second. But then, you had Dale Brown's last 5 years were losing seasons,
right,
with basically teams that were held together with scotch tape and glue. And then John Brady came in and that was my last year on the beat before I got out of the daily newspaper business. So I covered some pretty god awful basketball for 5-6 years. But Gert Hamink, the big Dutch boy in the paint, who was just, and we have remained good friends. And Brenda and I actually spent a day with him in Amsterdam last summer on a trip back. We made a point of stopping over in Amsterdam for a few days.
I remember you telling me that, and you actually had a picture of the three of you at a pub or something like that, which was pretty cool. I mean, Gert's one that I obviously remember during those years. And what I'll tell you that stands out most, and these are when I do have vivid memories, was when obviously Randy Livingston and Ronnie Henderson came in, and they were supposed to be the duo that sort of carried LSU through. And Randy, unfortunately, had a career beset by injuries, and Ronnie Henderson was a very good college basketball player. Mm-hmm. But it was just, I remember guys like Jamie Brandon in the program. It was unfortunate that it went the way it did, largely derailed by injuries and then the sanctions. But man, I was a college student whenever LSU went to Sweet 16 with John Brady in 2000 with Strohmile, and remember that season fondly. Obviously, I was out of school by the time they hit the 06 Final Four. And then, you've had good years, the Jarrell Martin, Jordan Mickey year. Ben Simmons didn't go the way we kind of all had hoped. And, obviously Will Wade had flares of success, met on time. If only NIL had come about 2 years earlier, Will Wade would still be LSU's coach and they'd be jamming.
No doubt. Well, you mentioned a couple of names in there. Well, Ronnie Henderson was just a fabulous player to watch, good athlete, good shooter. Never forget his first game. He was wide open on a breakaway, and his teammate did not pass him the ball, just went to the hole and laid it in. And Ronnie was shocked because he had never been in a situation on a team where he didn't get the ball when he was open. But Jamie Brandon, quick Jamie Brandon story if we have time before we go to break. So it was, call it 1991 maybe. Did
you just ask me if we have time before we go to break? This is your show.
Well, I know, but with all the floor directors and all the people here, no, it's not true. It's just me and Matt and Zoom and the stopwatch over here, but I got time. So I went down to the dungeon, which is the basement court in the Pete Maravich Assembly Center, and I'm standing next to Shaq, and some guy misses a shot and passes out, and a guy I had never seen before snags the ball at the top of the key, intercepts the pass, takes one dribble and takes off maybe at about 12 feet and throws down. And I mean, with authority. And I grab Shaq. I go, who the hell is that? And he says, it's Jamie Brandon from Chicago. Oh my, best pickup player ever. Not just that play. I mean, this guy was so unbelievable. And then they had the audacity to have uniforms and plays and officials, and screwed him up beyond belief. But my gosh, was that guy? He was 6'4", 210 pounds. could jump to he was all that and more in the pickup games. Oh my gosh. Shaq wasn't bad in pickup games either.
It would have been a fun year to be in the dungeon. Fun time to be in the dungeon.
Yeah. On that, yes, we're now out of time for this segment. When we get back, I want to talk some NIL with Matt Moscona. If there's one thing he knows about these days, it's NIL. I'm Lee Feinswag. It's Sports 225.
Congratulations, East Baton Rouge. You did it. You topped every big city in the country. You envisioned an ambitious reinvention of our park system. And we, as a community, embarked on a multi-year effort to reimagine our parks and facilities. And all that work didn't go unnoticed. You imagined, we delivered. Gold. BRAC, your #1 park system in the nation.
Back on Sports 225, hanging out with Matt Moscona. Among the other things that he does, in addition to radio and podcasts and being a guest on all sorts of things, and even this show once in a while, is an NIL podcast. And I need you to explain that and then kick around a few issues concerning NIL with me, if you would.
Yeah. So podcast is called Rosters to Riches, and it was a brainchild of our friends over at Matchpoint. So Matchpoint, for those who don't know, is a Baton Rouge-based company that was very early in the NIL space. When they saw it coming, they launched an app, and the interface is really simple. Matchpoint is an interface that matches athletes and brands to do NIL deals. If I'm going to download the app, you can see it's very easy to explain. But as NIL has evolved, they've continued to evolve, and they wanted to be in some content production. So Jonathan Pixley from Matchpoint and I do a weekly podcast, and we built it, Lee, with the intention of talking about NIL topics, at week to week as something might have come up. But what it's evolved into is essentially an interview series. And each week we interview a different athlete, coach, collective member, media member, business owners that do NIL deals. And it's been fascinating to learn this space from every different perspective.
Now, we have this joke on Matt's radio show when I go on each week, is that every time I say the word volleyball, one of his guys does a ding. And, and in my other side of my life, I own Volleyball Magazine with partners, and that's what I do all the time. Anyway, so there's always volleyball. And I joke with him about how I'm going to tie in volleyball with everything. So this past week, we talked about, Doc Rivers getting fired, and his daughter played volleyball at Florida, and Steve Kerr took the Warriors far, and his daughter played at Cal, and Steph Curry's sister played at Elon. I go on, and every time they have to ding, ding, ding. Well, Jonathan Pixley's wife, Donna, is one of the greatest volleyball coaches ever in the history of Louisiana. They're just retired after a great career at Dunham, still going to coach club volleyball for their Red Storm. And both of her daughters played volleyball, and her youngest daughter is going off to play small college volleyball. That was a lot of dings that your guys missed right there.
A lot of dings, but it's your show, so the dings don't have to exist here in the sequence.
If I had some little, noisemaker, I'd have done it, and I'm not going back in post. That's for sure. So, but back to the NIL. Lately, there's been so much talk about how much money in NIL has been coming to LSU women athletes, which is, of course, a byproduct of the basketball team winning the national championship. But wow, sort of big wow, huh?
Well, I think if there's one big takeaway, if you ask me, like, what is the big overarching takeaway of the entire of this whole process of doing these NIL podcasts, I would tell you it's that women are crushing NIL far more than male athletes are. And I think sometimes publicly we hear about the 5-star quarterback that gets a deal or something like that, but in the nuance, what you generally see is that most of the athletes that are having a successful NIL business, and I do use that term, are very good on social media and have a strong following on social media. And flatly, women have shown to be better at that, more diligent, more creative with the way they post, less risque in the sense that you tend, like, big no-nos are alcohol and pictures that might get you in trouble at work. Think of it like that. Men post those pictures by and large, women don't. So that's not, that's not binary. That's just saying what you find generally. So I think there have been immense opportunities for female athletes. I mean, I'll give you an example of the first guest we ever interviewed on the show was Sarah Edwards, who was a gymnast at LSU. She easily, in her last year at LSU, made 5 figures. And this is a very good gymnast at a very good gymnastics program, but not by any stretch a household name like Olivia Dunn or anything like that. But because she worked very hard at it, did her brand deals, was very good with her social presence, was able to make a lot of money for a college kid standards, or quite honestly by any adult's standards, and doing that while still competing. So it's interesting how NIL has been vilified by a lot of people, because you hear about the bad actors a lot, but what you miss are stories like that. And that is the overwhelming majority, which are young people that are taking advantage to find a way to run their own business around their brand and make money off of it.
Is this a true statement? A business that wants to, for lack of a better term, sponsor an athlete through NIL and their social media, that becomes an advertising expense for that.
It is.
As compared to simply giving them the money.
Well, there has to be a deliverable. So that's
Right.
another thing that's sort of confused. You can't just pay an athlete that's pay for play. There has to be a defined, contractually obligated deliverable. That could be an appearance, that could be social media posts, that could be autograph signings, whatever it may be. But there has to be a deliverable associated.
Right, which is on record now, and there's that business break, tax break, all the above, whatever you would call it. So unbelievable. Well, I can't believe that you're not personally rolling in NIL money. You should have you should instead of wearing that fine looking shirt you're wearing, you should look like NASCAR, women's basketball, international sports uniforms.
That's kind of what I do professionally. Is I do endorse brands. I mean, that's
I know you do. No, stop there while we're ahead. I was just
we're not ahead.
No, good point. You got that. He's Matt Moscona. We have very little time left in this Sports 225.
Congratulations, East Baton Rouge. You did it. You topped every big city in the country. You envisioned an ambitious reinvention of our park system. And we, as a community, embarked on a multi-year effort to reimagine our parks and facilities. And all that work didn't go unnoticed. You imagined, we delivered. Gold. BRAC, your #1 park system in the nation.
Coming down the home stretch of another Sports 225, the last one of the 2022-23 school year. I time it like that. We'll go into the best of, and there's some good ones. Go to sports225.com for all the show listings. And when you're watching here on Cox 4, which is your view, in the 30 seconds we have left, I defer to my guest, Matt Moscona, to tell you about something wonderful.
Yeah, I always appreciate the opportunity and the support. My son's a special needs kiddo. He attends St. Lillian Academy, which many people don't know about in the Baton Rouge area. They're merging actually with Hope Academy for next school year. So if you're ever looking for a great cause, that is an amazing school that does so much for families like ours with special needs kiddos. So if you're ever looking to be generous and give to a great cause, St. Lillian Academy is an awesome one, and we'd appreciate the support.
Awesome. And thank you for supporting a great cause, which is Sports 225, and taking time out of your busy day to come join me. We don't spend enough time together. We get those 15 minutes a week. And so this is wonderful. And I look forward to us toasting each other with a beer in person soon.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you for watching Sports 225. And we'll see you live again sometime in late August.
At carnival time by Baton Rouge Bay, that's the site of my story.